Chapter 227. It's this guy? I was excited at first, but then many questions popped up. How did this guy escape from Fire God Temple? How did you find me? Before I could ask, the fatty chuckled and walked over, hugging me. Looking at his actions, my eyes turned red. This fellow had entered such a terrifying place like Fire God Temple. Who knew how much terror and despair he had experienced in the past year before he finally managed to walk out of it in one piece. Just as I was feeling emotional, the fatty let go of me after hugging me lightly. Then he chuckled and said to me, "You're living quite comfortably, staying in a 5-star hotel all year round. I tried it just now. The bed is so soft. TSK, TSK. You really know how to enjoy yourself. Compared to your room, the small room I used to live in my sect is like a pig's nest." Hearing him exclaim, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This guy had escaped from death, but his heartless personality hadn't changed at all. Just as I was about to speak, he pulled me back and said with shifty eyes, "Also, you actually know Yipiampian. Why didn't you tell me before?" "What? Yipiampian? How does he know about this?" Before I could react, the fatty dodged to the side. I looked up and saw Yipiampian, who was wearing a black dress, standing not far behind him. She frowned and looked at me with a concerned gaze. I didn't know why, but I felt a little awkward. It was probably because Yipiampian had taken care of me for over a month. That was the worst period of my life, and I couldn't get out of it. Now that I thought about it, I didn't feel too sad. I just felt awkward, especially when I saw Yipiampian again. However, compared to the awkwardness, I was more confused. Why did the fatty and Yipiampian come to my place at the same time? From the fatty's tone, he seemed to be old friends with Yipiampian. After we walked in and sat down, the fatty told me what had happened during the year we were apart. A year's time was enough for a lot of things to happen, but Fatty only said a few words. It was not because he was a man of few words, but because a year's time was only a few days to him. According to him, when Boss Lou detonated the hundreds of kilograms of explosives in the Fire God Temple, the fatty fainted. When he woke up, he was already outside the Fire God Temple. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Yipiampian and the people from the Metaphysics Association. He and Yipiampian knew each other. At that time, Yipiampian was about to return. After asking about the situation, she left Shenangjia with him and came all the way to Shenzhen to find me. After hearing that, I couldn't help but open my mouth wide. In this 1 year, the fatty actually just slept in the Fire God Temple and came back directly. No wonder this fellow didn't feel the slightest bit of emotion when he saw me. I thought he was just being simple-minded, but now it seems that I misunderstood him. If I were in his shoes, I definitely wouldn't feel the slightest bit of emotion. Who in their right mind would feel emotional after a nap? We stared at each other for a long time. Then I asked him how he knew Yipiampian. The fatty said that his teacher, Master Guan, worked in the Taoist Association and was old friends with Grandpa Li. He knew Yipiampian a long time ago. After listening to him, I felt a little emotional. I had known Yipiampian for a long time, but I didn't know that they had such a relationship. After some small talk, I couldn't help but be curious. I turned to ask Yipiampian, what did they find in the Fire God Temple? The strange words that the silver-eyed stone statue told me in the Fire God Temple had been bothering me. Although I didn't know the reason, I always felt that the stone statue had something to do with me. That was why I was especially concerned about the secret of the Fire God Temple. However, after asking, Yipiampian shook her head at me and said, "We did open the Fire God Temple according to your method, but after we studied it for a few months, Grandpa asked me to come back first and only brought a few people in the Heavenly Master realm. When I was about to come back, Lin, who suddenly came out of the fire god temple. After Grandpa and the others asked me about the situation, they asked me to bring him back. Originally, I wanted to bring him back to Kaifeng, but he insisted on coming to find you. I had no choice but to bring him here. After listening to her words, I felt discouraged. The fire god temple was still an unknown mystery. It seemed that I could only wait for Grandpa Li to come out and find a chance to ask him. After talking about the current situation for a while, the fatty heard that I was about to leave Shenzhen and invited me to stay with him in Kaifeng for a while. My original plan was to find a place to meditate and cultivate after leaving Shenzhen. After my pressure point realm was completed, I would think of a way to contact Yi Piampian and see if I could get enough obsidian stones for me to break through to the glorious knowledge realm. Since the fatty's suggestion was perfect, I agreed after thinking for a while. It was already late at night. I contacted the front desk and booked a room next door for Yi Piampian. The fatty squeezed in with me to sleep. After Yi Piampian left, the fatty walked over with shifty eyes and hammered my shoulder. He said to me in an interrogative tone, "Third baby, you brat, you've always wanted to get rich quietly since you were young. Tell me, when did you hook up with Yi Piampian?" I leaned on the bed and glanced at him. I said in annoyance, "Yi Piampian is a great beauty. Even if I wanted to hook up with her, I would have to have the ability to do so. Which eye of yours saw me hook up with her?" The fat man curled his lips and said, "Bullsh asterisk T. Yi Piampian and I are old acquaintances. I've never seen her talk to any man for more than 5 sentences. Even if he really went there, it would be hard to lure him out of the fire god temple, let alone go in." After my advice, the fatty finally calmed down. He stood there and thought for a while. Then he sighed and sat down again. I heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, I didn't tell him what happened. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to hold him back. Taking advantage of his hesitation, I tried to calm him down. Grandpa Li and the others have already entered the fire god temple. When they come back, we'll go and ask them. Then we'll know what happened inside. Even if Uncle Lin really went in, you have to wait until Grandpa Li comes back if you want to find him. The fatty hesitated for a while, but eventually nodded. After this incident, although the fatty didn't act impulsively, he was a lot more depressed. He didn't say anything else and just laid down to sleep. I also laid down, but I couldn't fall asleep. I squinted my eyes and recalled the trip to the fire god temple. I suddenly remembered the strange behavior of the woman called Bai Ling when the fire god temple disappeared in front of my eyes. I couldn't help but ask the fatty if he noticed Bai Ling after he woke up. At that time, the fatty and Bai Ling had a close relationship. When I asked him, he immediately said, "After I woke up, I looked around. Besides himself, I didn't find anyone else." Then he asked me curiously, why did I think of Bai Ling? This time, I didn't hide it from him. I told him about the appearance of the silver-eyed statue after they disappeared, as well as Bai Ling's strange behavior. The fatty opened his eyes wide and was stunned for a long time. Then he said with an incredulous expression, "I didn't know that Bai Ling wasn't a simple person." The two of us discussed this matter for a long time, but we didn't have any clues. In the end, we went to sleep and didn't talk about it anymore. The next day, after I packed my things, I went with the fatty and Yi Piampian. I was about to take a taxi to the train station when I suddenly received a call from Su Ziyu. On the phone, Su Ziyu told me that she had finished her business and had contacted the people of Mount Longhu of the Genie School. They had agreed to let her join Mount Longhu. At this moment, she was heading to Jiangxi. She said that she wanted to meet me before entering Mount Longhu. Ever since I got to know Su Ziyu, she seemed to have been cursed by fate. All kinds of misfortune came one after another, And among all the misfortune, part of it was because of Tong Tong, and part of it was because of me. Hearing her pleading tone, I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Chapter 228. On the way to Jiangxi, the fatty talked to me about Mount Longhu. Earlier, he told me that his teacher was from the Kaifeng school of divination. According to the theory of cultivation, Taoism was divided into many schools. The two biggest ones were Zhengyi and Chuanjin. The Zhengyi school was led by the celestial master sect of Mount Longhu and focused on the Tao of talismans. The Chuanjin school belonged to the Danding school and focused on the gold core. In addition to these two major schools, there were also some relatively small schools. The divination school that the fatty belonged to was one of them. The divination school was a Taoist school that focused on divination and divination. It focused on the six senses of wonders and geomancy. It was very different from the Zhengyi school and the Chuanjin school, but it had a lot in common with feng shui. I guessed it was because of the difference in Taoist philosophy that the fatty had mocked the Zhengyi school along the way. He said that the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu had been involved with the secular world and had long lost their Taoist heart. He also said that their practice of talismans was neglecting the essentials and that it would be difficult for them to achieve enlightenment. I just smiled and didn't say anything. The fatty looked down on the Tao of talismans of Mount Longhu, but I didn't dare to look down on them, let alone the others. The two kinds of talismans I mainly used, the Golden Light Divine Incantation and the Pure Yang Divine Incantation, were both from the Zhengyi school. Mount Longhu led the world of talismans. It was said that Celestial Master Zhang had taught the 8 great Taoist incantations. Moreover, each of the incantations had a corresponding magical tool that was stored on Mount Longhu. Although I didn't know why the death scripture had records of the 8 great Taoist incantations, I didn't dare to look down on them after practicing them. However, in terms of power, the Golden Light Divine Incantation and the Pure Yang Divine Incantation were my main cultivation methods. They were also my main reliance in battles. Furthermore, among these 8 great mantras, with my current sealed Acupoint 9 Acupoints cultivation, I can only barely use 2 of them. Of the remaining 6 types of calligraphy, one of them is the 3 pure mantra that can be practiced by those in the glorious memory realm. Other than that, the remaining 5 mantras can only be studied and practiced by those in the heavenly master realm. Since only the celestial master realm cultivators were qualified to practice the incantations, one could easily imagine their power. That was not the most important thing. The most important thing was another name for the righteous sect, the sage sect. On Mount Longhu, every generation's sect leader was known as the celestial master. They had flourished for 2,000 years without declining. Moreover, Mount Longhu in Jiangxi and Xiubu in Shandong were known as the 2 holy lands. They had always been known as Zhang in the south and Kong in the north. It was clear how rich their heritage was. However, there was nothing wrong with the first point that the fatty complained about. The celestial master sect had always been conferred by the imperial court and led the Taoist sects in the world. They were indeed very close to the secular world. The reason why they had the title of Zhang in the south and Kong in the north was inseparable from this. Even now, the Taoist sect's way of doing things had not changed. The current Taoist master of the Taoist Association and the director of the State Religious Affairs Administration had almost always been the Taoist master of the Taoist sect. Moreover, Mount Longhu had long been open to the public as a scenic spot. It was the intangible cultural heritage of the world's Danxia landform, and it was also a national 5A scenic spot. Take Su Ziyu's conversion as an example. If it were another Taoist sect, she wouldn't have been able to do it so smoothly. However, Su Ziyu had just contacted the Celestial Master sect for a while, and they had quickly agreed. Su Ziyu was a star from a talent show, and she had the support of Kum and Thom. Her path to stardom had been smooth, and she could be considered a top B-list star in the country. Of course, the Celestial Master Sect was happy to see such a public figure convert. It was good for the Celestial Master Sect to promote their reputation. We chatted along the way, and the day passed quickly. In the evening, we finally arrived at Yingtan City. Mount Longhu was located in Guishi City, which was under the jurisdiction of Yingtan City. However, Su Ziyu's conversion ceremony was tomorrow, so we weren't in a hurry. We stayed in Yingtan City that night. Mount Longhu was a famous place in Yingtan City. That was why the Taoist culture flourished here. Even the hotel we stayed in had many talismans hanging on the wall. However, I took a quick glance and found that none of them had Taoist energy fluctuations. I guess they were all fakes. However, the moment I moved my eyes away, I saw 2 talismans with faint yang energy, which made the entire lobby brighter and warmer. Although this weak yang qi had an effect on those ghosts with cultivation, it still had a great restraining effect on ordinary Yin souls. Ordinary Yin souls could not even get close to this hotel. This was the difference between Taoist and Feng Shui. From the perspective of talismans, Taoist was much easier to learn than Feng Shui. At the very least, Feng Shui masters had to reach the Earth Master realm to make talismans. However, Taoist masters were different. Even Taoists who had just started could make effective talismans, such as the 2 talismans I was looking at. Of course, the power of the talismans made by Taoist masters was different. After thinking for a while, I understood the reason. I thought that the old Taoist was just asking casually, but after hearing my answer, his expression changed drastically, and he asked, Zhou Yi, the genius Zhou Yi of the Mystic Society that appears once in 1,000 years. I was dumbfounded. I had indeed displayed extraordinary talent during the Young Phoenix gathering, but where did the title of once in 1,000 years come from? I rubbed my nose and nodded awkwardly. It's a bit exaggerated to say that it's once in 1,000 years, but I'm indeed Zhou Yi. The old Taoist recovered from his shock after a long time and hurriedly asked me, Taoist Zhou, why did you come to my Mount Longhu? It seemed that ever since the Young Phoenix gathering, my name had spread throughout the metaphysics world. This old Taoist was already so old, but he had just called me little friend. Now, he had changed it to fellow Taoist. Moreover, he even asked me what I wanted. It was obvious that he was talking to me as an equal. I shook my head and said, Su Miaoyu and I are university classmates. I only came to watch her conversion ceremony, so I wouldn't dare to say that I wanted to meet her. The old Taoist seemed to be relieved, but he immediately said, I didn't know that fellow Taoist would come, so I've neglected you. However, the conversion ceremony was only a secular ceremony. Later, in the Celestial Master Mansion, there will be a formal apprenticeship ceremony for you to join our Celestial Master Sect. If fellow Taoist Zhou has time, why don't you come inside and watch? His words made me feel flattered. The Celestial Master Mansion's full name was Celestial Master Mansion of the Han Dynasty, also known as the Great Taoist Mansion. It was the residence of Celestial Master Zhang. Although there was a scenic area in the Celestial Master Mansion, it was only open to the public. The real Celestial Master Mansion was the core of the Celestial Master Sect, so they wouldn't easily invite outsiders in. Although I didn't really want to watch Su Ziyu's apprenticeship ceremony, I was still quite curious about the Celestial Master Mansion. Moreover, they had already invited me, so it would be disrespectful if I refused. After thinking for a while, I nodded and agreed. Then I asked him, I have 2 good friends who are waiting outside the side hall. Can they go with me? The old Taoist nodded without hesitation. If they're both from the metaphysics world, it's fine. Fellow Taoist, you can call them in and go with me to the celestial master mansion. I went out and told the fatty and Yi Pian about this. They didn't say anything and followed me inside. The old Taoist was surprised to see Yi Pian. After a slight hesitation, he cupped his hands and asked, "Fellow Taoist, are you Vice President Yi of the Metaphysics Society?" His words stunned me. However, Yi Pian had obviously heard this kind of address many times, so her expression didn't change. Chapter 230. At this moment, I understood why the old Taoist priest was so shocked after hearing my name. No wonder he invited me to the celestial master mansion. It wasn't because of his respect for my identity, but because he wanted to calm me down so that he could report to his superiors. I had a good impression of this old Taoist priest. The fat Taoist priest's words seemed to be correct. Currently, only Mount Longhu had the inheritance of the 8 great Taoist mantras. However, it didn't mean that Mount Longhu had the rights to them. It was said that the 8 great Taoist mantras were passed down by the 3 pure Taoist ancestors. Mount Longhu was the place where the 3 pure Taoist ancestors passed down their inheritance. But which one in this world didn't have the inheritance of the 3 pure Taoist ancestors? I coldly looked at the fat Taoist priest and raised my voice. The 8 great Taoist mantras were passed down by the 3 pure Taoist ancestors. It's true that Mount Longhu has the inheritance, but just because you have the inheritance of the 3 pure Taoist ancestors, you forbid others from receiving the inheritance of the 3 pure Taoist ancestors. What kind of logic is that? The fat Taoist priest acted as if it was only natural and said with a mocking tone, "Of course, our Mount Longhu doesn't forbid others from receiving the inheritance of the 3 pure Taoist ancestors. However, we forbid those who aren't from our sect from receiving the inheritance of the 3 pure Taoist ancestors. Moreover, only our Mount Longhu has the inheritance of the 8 great Taoist ancestors. Where did you get them? Don't tell me that the 3 pure Taoist ancestors personally passed them down to you." I shook my head. Of course, I don't have that kind of fortune. I saw these 2 divine Taoist ancestors in an ancient book. Then I studied them and gradually understood them. Ancient book, the fat Taoist priest's tone was still full of mockery. Then, show us the ancient book you mentioned. I'm afraid it's not an ancient book from Mount Longhu. My expression darkened. This fat Taoist's words had gone too far. Who in this world would allow someone to show their inheritance to outsiders? Before I could say anything, the fat Taoist on the side spoke first. He smiled mockingly and said to the fat Taoist, "Then why is your Longhu mountain always talking about the 8 great divine incantations and the mighty scripture of the righteous alliance? They are all inheritances of your Longhu mountain. Why don't you show us the righteous one and the supreme mystery scripture?" "Who are you?" The fat Taoist priest's face darkened. He gloomily turned around and glared at the fat Taoist priest. The fatty wanted to say something, but I reached out and pulled him back. After all, we were on Mount Longhu. It was better to be cautious. A series of questions came from the reporters' mouths, which made me feel dizzy. Never would I have thought that these reporters would be able to link so many things to me in an instant just because they saw me entering the side chamber. I waved my hand, indicating that I didn't want to be interviewed. Then, I prepared to squeeze through the crowd. However, when the reporters saw that I wanted to leave, they tightened their encirclement. It seemed they didn't want to let me go. I was a little annoyed. I guided a small flow of Tao energy to cover my entire body. Then, I continued to squeeze through the crowd. The reporters couldn't squeeze through, so they could only watch me squeeze through the crowd. Together with the fat man and Yi Pian, we left Mount Tianmen and headed to the outside of Mount Longhu. By the time we got out of Mount Longhu, it was getting late. The fat man suggested that we find a place to stay in Guishi City for the night and leave tomorrow morning. At first, Yi Piampian and I agreed. However, after a few steps, Yi Piampian suddenly frowned and said to us, "We don't need to stay here tonight. Let's find a car and leave." The fat man and I were surprised. Before we could ask, Yi Piampian turned to look behind us and said with a serious face, "Someone's following us. Someone's following us." After what happened in the Celestial Master's mansion, we didn't need to guess who was following us. It was definitely someone from Mount Longhu. Chapter 231. As the leader of the Taoist sects, Celestial Master Cult's power was unfathomable. The fatty and my expressions changed. We didn't dare to delay, and quickly found a car to head towards Ingtan City. Along the way, the fatty and I urged the driver to speed up, but Yi Piampian's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Her cultivation was higher than mine, and I couldn't sense the location of the people chasing behind us, but she could. From her expression, I didn't even need to ask to know that it was definitely the people from Celestial Master Cult that were getting closer. It was already late at night, and there were very few cars on the road. When the car we were in reached a desolate road, even I felt a few presences rapidly closing in on us. Each of the presences were extremely strong and were at least in the realm of glory of consciousness. After we gave him the money, the driver had already increased the speed of the car to the maximum, but it was just a taxi after all, so it couldn't go any faster. After driving for another 10 minutes, the strong presences were already less than a kilometer away from us. Fatty and I remained silent, but Yi Piampian suddenly opened her mouth and said to the driver, "Sir, please pull over in front of us." I was shocked and quickly asked Yi Piampian why she had to stop. Before she could speak, the driver was obedient and immediately braked, stopping by the side of the road. He probably saw that something was wrong from our conversation and expressions. Yi Piampian directly pushed open the car door and walked out. After the fatty and I followed, she said, "With our speed, we definitely can't escape. Why don't we get off and prepare, so as to not hurt the innocent?" Hearing what she said, the fatty and I remained silent. She said prepare, but in reality, the kilometer of road was covered in the blink of an eye. Just as we said that, 2 black SUVs drove in front of us. After 2 ear-piercing braking sounds, a few people wearing Taoist robes walked out of the cars. I took a rough look. There were a total of 8 people, and all of them were in the realm of glory of consciousness. The one walking at the front was the fat Taoist Chen Yongting. Seeing their formation, I smiled wryly in my heart. A total of 8 people in the realm of glory of consciousness. Even if it was someone like Chen Bingcheng, who hadn't even reached 1 meridian, it would be hard for us to deal with them. Moreover, Mount Longhu's reputation for 2,000 years was no joke. Among these people, the one with the lowest cultivation was probably much more powerful than Chen Bingcheng. There was also Chen Yongting. He was the master of the mysterious altar hall of the Taoist Master Mansion, and his strength was at least on par with Yi Piampian's. After walking in front of us, Chen Yongting smiled wholeheartedly and said, "Fellow Taoists, we meet again." The 3 of us were secretly on guard and did not make a sound. That Chen Yongting slowly said, "Today on the mountain, I said that Dao Friend Zhou would either cripple his own cultivation and hand over the ancient book, or he would not be able to leave Dragon Tiger Mountain in one piece." At that time, Dao Friend Zhou probably thought that this poor Taoist was joking, but now you should be able to see that I am not joking with you. Of course, out of respect for Vice President Yi, I'll still give you these 2 choices. Which one will you choose, fellow Taoist Zhou? Before I could say anything, Yi Piampian took a step forward and glared at Chun Yongting coldly. Aren't you afraid of my Metaphysics Association's revenge? Revenge? Chun Yongting sneered. His face was filled with indescribable arrogance as he said disdainfully, in the world of metaphysics, who would dare to take revenge on my dragon tiger mountain? Moreover, today on the mountain, under the watchful eyes of the public, you are only a girl at the intermediate stage of the glorious memory realm. As long as you don't leave any traces, what right does the Metaphysics Association have to take revenge on my dragon tiger mountain? Yi Piampian's voice became even colder as she said, since you know my identity, you should know my grandfather. Do you think that my grandfather won't notice anything if you kill me? Her words instantly reminded me of the ghost seal on Liang Kaixiong's body. Liang Kaixiong was only the son of the great elder of the ghost-raising sect, yet he had such a magical item on him. How could Yi Piampian not have it? Thinking of this, I immediately relaxed. No matter how arrogant Chun Yongting was, he should still be wary of Grandfather Li's prestige, right? Who would have thought that Chun Yongting's mocking expression would become even thicker after hearing this? He sneered and said, "It's just some items that are related to the soul. Do you think that my dragon tiger mountain doesn't have a way to deal with it? Moreover, I can't bear to kill such a delicate little beauty like you. I just want to capture you alive. I can assure you that once you enter my dragon tiger mountain, Grandfather Li of the Metaphysics Association won't be able to find your whereabouts no matter how powerful he is." Yi Piampian's expression became even colder. She stood there without saying anything. Her entire body had turned into a piece of 1,000-year-old mysterious ice. I felt gloomy, although Chun Yongting's words were vague. The perverted smile on his face was obvious. Of course, I understood what he meant. I couldn't help but hesitate. Yi Piampian had helped me before. How could I bear to see her suffer such a calamity because of me? However, before I could make a decision, an emerald green bamboo flute about a foot long appeared in Yi Piampian's hand. She casually waved it in front of her. Air flowed through the holes of the flute, creating a muffled sound that spread far into the night sky. It sounded like the whimpering of ghosts. But now, Yi Piampian was facing the 7 glorious consciousness realm experts of Mount Longhu alone, forcing everyone to retreat and defend with a single step. Only then did the uniqueness of the Aura Steps technique appear. My heart instantly calmed down. As expected of a 3-vein Earthmaster, Yi Piampian, if she used all of her power, we might have a chance of winning today. Seizing this chance, I ordered Tong Tong to help Yi Piampian. But right at this moment, Chun Yongting, who had been standing on the side, lifted his foot and walked in front of me. He had a strange smile on his face, and his voice was filled with emotion as he said, "With your mere touch of pressure realm cultivation, you can actually block the combined attack of several glory of memory realm cultivators. As expected of a god curse, if I capture you today, the Heavenly Master will definitely bestow these 2 god curses upon me to cultivate. Perhaps I'll be able to break through to the path of the Heavenly Master. Ha." As he said that, Chun Yongting's face was flushed. He raised the peachwood sword in his hand and casually tapped it a few times in the air, forming a talisman. It transformed into a ray of light that rapidly flew towards me. Before the talisman even reached me, its surging power had already enveloped my surroundings, giving me immense pressure. I was almost unable to move. Chun Yongting's power wasn't inferior to Yi Piampian's. He was at least in the middle stage of the glorious consciousness realm, or even the late stage of the glorious consciousness realm. I didn't dare to let Tong Tong help Yi Piampian now, so I called her to attack Chun Yongting. I first guided Dao Qi into the square heavenly fan and summoned the wild grass from the lonely grave to block Chen Yangting's talisman. Then, I quickly took out the Yin Yang Yama brush. After pouring Dao Qi into it, Yin and Yang Qi flowed out from the tip of the brush, forming an enormous yin-yang fish between me and Chen Yangting. Ever since Zhang Canwen had insisted on giving me the Yin Yang Yama brush, I had taken out 3 drops of blood essence from my heart and immersed them in it. Every day, I calmed my mind and nourished it, turning it into my natal magic weapon. Now that I was using it, it was becoming easier and easier. The yin and yang fish formed by yin and yang qi was also different from before. In the past, the yin and yang fish had only been formed by black and white yin and yang qi, but now the yin and yang fish had 2 circular cores within the yin and yang qi. Yin and yang qi flowed out of these cores and then spiraled. What was even stranger was that as the yin and yang qi flowed, the 2 cores didn't move at all. Logically speaking, in this way, there would always be a situation where yin qi flowed to the yang qi core, or yang qi flowed to the yin qi core. But in reality, these 2 cores were always in their own areas. The yang qi core was always within the range of the yang qi, and the yin qi core was always within the yin qi core. Looking at it this way, the yin and yang qi seemed to be still and didn't flow together. It sounded very contradictory, but this was the strange thing about the yin and yang fish. Between heaven and earth, yin and yang qi were originally dependent on each other. Yin gave birth to yang, and yang gave birth to yin. The mystery was really difficult to describe in words. After this change, although the size of the yin and yang fish did not change, it was more powerful than before. The yin and yang qi swallowed and spiraled, directly rushing toward Chen Yangting. At the same time, Tong Tong didn't stay idle. She put her hands together, and the black silk thread that was originally held in her 2 hands combined into one. The dark color was even more than before, and there was something like a black liquid flowing on this slightly thick silk thread. It seemed that its power was not to be underestimated. She waved the silk thread forward. The silk thread didn't extend and stretch as usual. Instead, at the end, a drop of thick black liquid was thrown out, directly flying toward Chen Yangting's face. With the support of my abundant qi of the way, although the lonely grave and wild grass in the square sky fan eventually collapsed, it still blocked Chen Yangting's teleportation talisman. At this time, facing the yin and yang fish and the black liquid in Tong Tong's eyes, his expression was solemn. He put down the peachwood sword in his hand and didn't use teleportation talisman again. Instead, he suddenly took a step forward. Chen Yangting actually knew the astral footwork technique. My expression became solemn. Taoism and metaphysics both came from old Zhuang's lineage, and there were naturally similarities between their spells. It wasn't strange for Chen Yangting to use the astral footwork technique, but his astral footwork technique was different from Yi Piampian's. After taking a step forward, nothing strange happened, but his aura suddenly increased. At the same time, another talisman appeared in his hand. With a wave of his hand, it spontaneously combusted. At this time, I finally understood that his astral footwork technique was actually to activate the talisman in his hand. What kind of talisman was this that required the astral footwork technique to activate? Very quickly, I saw the answer. After the talisman burned, there wasn't even a trace of ash left. There were only a few wisps of green smoke that floated into the air. In the originally clear night sky, a dark cloud suddenly appeared above the wisps of green smoke. Then thunder rumbled, and a bolt of lightning flashed across the night sky. My expression changed. This talisman was actually the legendary lightning summoning technique. All of this took a long time to describe, but in reality, it happened in an instant. I did my best to send the Taoist energy that the jade bracelet had absorbed into the square heaven fan, making the barren grave several times taller. The wild grass also grew crazily, trying to block the lightning. But it was all in vain. Under the power of the heavens, the barren grave instantly collapsed, and the wild grass was cut off. Even the painting of the lonely grave and weeds had completely collapsed. The Taoist energy on the square heaven fan had completely dissipated, turning it black. The only fortunate thing was that the power of the heavenly lightning had finally dissipated, leaving only a faint streak of silver lightning that darted towards me. At this moment, I was already exhausted. The Taoist energy in my body had been used up, so how could I block it? I could only let the silver light enter my body through my arm. Instantly, my body went numb. I shivered, and then I spat out a mouthful of blood. After the mouthful of blood fell on the ground, the silver light flashed, and the power of the silver light finally dissipated. I sat on the ground, dispirited. Although I was already severely injured, I still felt lucky. When I first saw the power of the lightning, I even felt that I was facing a situation of certain death. There was no chance of survival. In the end, I used up all my strength to block it. It was really a stroke of luck. But just as I exhaled, the rumbling of thunder came from the sky. I lifted my head and saw that the dark clouds hadn't dissipated. I used the last bit of Taoist qi in my body to try to pull her back. At this moment, the lightning had already left the dark clouds and was heading towards us. Just as I was dashing forward with all my might, I heard the fatties shout from behind me. "Third baby, don't go up. Come back, come back." I glanced out of the corner of my eye. The fatty shouted as he ran towards me. To be honest, facing the power of the heavenly lightning, I also wanted to retreat as far as possible. However, I couldn't give up on Tong Tong. Although she was a ghost, ever since she had been with me, she had always been like a little sister to me. After so many years, I had long regarded her as my family. When Lu Jinyang killed my parents, I could only stand by and watch helplessly. At that time, I swore that I would never let such a thing happen in front of me again. But who would have thought that in just a few short months, misfortune would befall me again? My parents had sacrificed themselves to protect me. I couldn't just watch Tong Tong do the same thing again. Thus, I didn't care about the fatty's shout and used all my strength to charge towards Tong Tong's side. However, due to my heavy injuries, my speed was very slow. On the other hand, the speed of the heavenly lightning was extremely fast. As it descended from the sky, the distance of several thousand meters seemed to be covered in an instant. My eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. I heavily hammered my chest, using the last bit of Tao Qi in my body to hit my chest. My heart suddenly trembled, and the blood from my heart was stimulated. In an instant, it circulated through my entire body, giving me an abundant amount of power. My speed suddenly increased. I dashed forward and finally reached Tong Tong's side. I pounced on her and hugged the enormous black cocoon. Just as I hugged Tong Tong, the fatty behind me had already run close to us. However, he didn't rush towards us. Instead, he abruptly stopped and stood about 10 meters away from us. He placed both of his hands in front of his chest, his thumbs constantly trembling as he rapidly counted on the remaining fingers. After he stopped, he suddenly waved his right hand forward, throwing a few weak light spots next to Tong Tong and me. I was really curious as to what the fatty had done, but I couldn't care about that as the heavenly lightning was already in front of us. The last bit of Tao Qi in my body had been used up, and I had even overdrafted the power of my heart's blood. At this moment, I was like a lamp that had run out of oil. However, as I hugged Tong Tong, I also grabbed the jade bracelet. The jade bracelet had a true dragon vein. There was also the dark green energy that was covering the true dragon vein. At this moment, facing the heavenly lightning, I couldn't care about hiding these secrets. After grabbing the jade bracelet, I used all my strength to absorb the dark green energy into my body. Chapter 234. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a hand. I regretted it, blamed myself, and felt lucky at the same time. I regretted that the thing I had sworn never to face had happened again. I blamed myself for making a mistake when I used the dark green energy. Although the dark green energy couldn't stop the heavenly lightning, if I had used it correctly, I could have consumed half of the lightning's power, which would have alleviated Tong Tong's pain. Of course, the most important thing was that Tong Tong was still alive. This was also something I was glad about. As long as she was alive, there was still hope. I thought about it. The reason why Tong Tong hadn't moved was that she was still resisting the power of the heavenly lightning. Tong Tong was an Yin soul, and the heavenly lightning was the power of Yang. If I wanted to help Tong Tong, I had to put this silkworm cocoon in a place with a lot of Yin energy. After thinking about it carefully, I realized that the place I had encountered the most Yin energy should be the place where the Tai Sui giant corpse was in the corpse sect. The heaven-level Yin energy there was definitely good for Tong Tong, and it would also help her resist the power of the heavenly lightning. However, that place was the corpse sect's forbidden area. After the previous incident, it was impossible to send Tong Tong there. Aside from that place, the place with the most Yin energy was the jade bracelet where Tong Tong usually resided. That bracelet contained 100,000 souls from the Ghost Valley, as well as the 10,000 souls she had absorbed from the ghost subduing master during the exchange competition. Although the Yin energy of those souls couldn't be compared to the heaven-level Yin energy, a quantitative change could lead to a qualitative change. The thick Yin energy created by the large number of souls couldn't be underestimated. At this moment, sending Tong Tong back to the jade bracelet was the best choice. However, Tong Tong was inside the silkworm cocoon, and I couldn't contact her. How could I send her back? I held the jade bracelet and approached the silkworm cocoon. As soon as the jade bracelet touched the cocoon, the huge silkworm cocoon disappeared into thin air. Although I couldn't sense the situation inside the jade bracelet, it was clear that the silkworm cocoon had returned to the jade bracelet. I heaved a sigh of relief. Since my eyes could block the heavenly lightning, with the help of the spirit inside the jade bracelet, I would be able to eliminate the power of the heavenly lightning in time to get rid of it. I would be able to get out of here. After doing that, I slumped to the ground. The exhaustion and pain caused by the exhaustion of my Tao energy burst out. I felt dizzy as if I would faint in the next second. However, I didn't dare to faint at this moment. I forcefully bit my tongue to wake myself up. I first absorbed the enormous amount of dark green energy in the air back into my body. Then, I grabbed the jade bracelet and started to absorb the true dragon energy from within. The fatty stood beside me and naturally saw everything. However, the origin of the dark green energy was mysterious, and the fatty didn't recognize it. It was obvious that he didn't put it in his heart. He was filled with doubt as he asked me if the surging energy from the jade bracelet was a true dragon's vein. I hesitated for a while, then nodded. When I went to the Metaphysics Society to absorb the true dragon aura, I also took the true dragon vein into my jade bracelet. After listening to me, the fat man opened his mouth and eyes wide. After a long time, he put on a speechless expression and gave me a thumbs up. He pointed behind me and said, "Yi Piampian can't take it anymore." I turned around and saw that Yi Piampian was still under the siege of the 6 Taoist priests. I turned around and saw that Yi Piampian was still under the siege of the 6 Taoist priests. The Taoist priest she had hurt with her astral steps was lying on the ground. I didn't know if he was dead or alive, although she had taken care of one person and did not seem to be at a disadvantage on the battlefield. It was obvious that Yi Piampian's aura was extremely weak. It was obvious that she had exhausted all of her qi of the way by these shameless people from Longhu Mountain who had bullied her with their numbers. Before I could say anything, the fatty shouted, "Sister Piampian, I've set up a formation here. Come here and rest for a while." As soon as he said that, Yi Piampian chanted, "Step on the ground and mark the sky, 15 traces of you." After chanting, she lifted her left foot and was about to step on the ground. When the 6 Taoist priests heard the chant and saw Yi Piampian's movement, they didn't hesitate and took a step back. They were on guard. Unexpectedly, Yi Piampian's attack was just a feint. Her raised left foot didn't step on the ground. Instead, she turned around and ran toward us. The 6 Taoist priests recognized that they had been tricked. Enraged, they followed her and stormed toward us. When Yi Piampian arrived in front of us, the fatty made a hand seal and pointed in her direction. He didn't put down his hand until Yi Piampian reached us. Then the 6 Taoist priests also ran toward us. However, when they came close, the first glimmering barrier that had appeared when the heavenly lightning struck appeared again, blocking their way. The old Taoists did not pay any attention to the seemingly ordinary barrier. The one in the lead swung the horsetail whisk in his hand in an attempt to break the barrier. However, it was to no avail. There was not even a single ripple on the shimmering barrier. The Taoist priests didn't believe it and took out their talismans in an attempt to break the barrier. However, it wasn't any different from the previous blow with the horsetail whisk. The glimmering barrier didn't ripple at all. The Taoist priests' expressions changed. After discussing for a while, they didn't continue to attack. 2 of them went to check on the Taoist priest that Yi Piampian had injured, while the others sat cross-legged on the ground, quietly adjusting the Taoist energy in their bodies. It was obvious that they had consumed a lot of energy while fighting against Yi Piampian. I retracted my gaze and looked at the fatty in surprise. Their Zhanyan school's cultivation technique was too special. It couldn't be compared to the dragon-seeking acupuncture point technique or the glory of knowledge technique. However, from his attainments and formations, the fatty's cultivation base wasn't low. At the very least, it wasn't lower than mine. The 2 of us had entered the path of cultivation at about the same age. In comparison, the fatty's cultivation talent wasn't inferior to mine. Of course, he had a famous teacher to guide him. So his journey had been extremely smooth, unlike my bumpy road. In this aspect, the 2 of us were completely different. With the protection of the fatty's formation, Chen Yangting and the other Taoist priests of Mount Longhu needed to rest. We were temporarily safe. After Yi Piampian returned, she briefly asked about what had just happened. Then she sat cross-legged next to me and began to adjust her Taoist energy. After a bitter battle, we had competed in cultivation and power. Now, under the protection of the fatty's formation, we were competing in terms of recovery power. In terms of recovery power, there was nothing in this world that could recover Taoist energy better than the true dragon vein. During the time that Yi Piampian had returned, the empty acupoints in my body had been replenished by nearly half. In a few more minutes, my Taoist energy would be completely restored. At this moment, I finally saw a glimmer of an opportunity for victory. As long as Yi Piampian and I could recover before the people of Mount Longhu, we could join forces and attack. Even if we couldn't defeat these people, we would be able to exhaust the Taoist energy that they had just recovered. Then, we could seize the time to recover, and there would be a moment of victory. Thinking of this, I was extremely excited. However, there was still a problem. I had the true dragon vein to recover, so there was no need to mention my speed. However, Yi Pianpian didn't have it, so it was very difficult for her to be fast. If it was just me alone, Chun Yangting would probably be able to kill me as long as he recovered half of his strength. After thinking about it, since my Taoist energy had already recovered by half, I might as well let Yi Pianpian use the jade bracelet first. She already knew that the true dragon vein was with me, so there was naturally no need to hide it. I directly handed the jade bracelet to her and told her the true dragon vein is in this jade bracelet. Take it and absorb the dragon chi. Once your Taoist energy is replenished, we will have a chance to win. Yi Pianpian frowned slightly and then nodded. Without saying anything, she directly took the jade bracelet and closed her eyes to absorb the true dragon chi. Without the replenishment of the true dragon chi, the recovery speed of my Taoist energy had decreased by more than 10 times. However, time was of the essence, so I could recover as much as I could. I also closed my eyes and tried my best to guide the Taoist energy through the circulatory cycle in my meridians. Not long after I closed my eyes, I suddenly felt my hand being pulled by someone. I looked down in astonishment and instantly widened my eyes. The person pulling my hand was actually Yi Pianpian. Chapter 235. Yi Pianpian's voice was calm, which made me feel uneasy. I sat there awkwardly for a while, but I couldn't calm down. Suddenly, I remembered that the fatty was still next to us. Sneaking a glance at him, I saw that he was staring at me with a strange smile. I felt a little guilty and glared at him. Then I turned around and closed my eyes, forcing myself to absorb the true dragon aura. Since my mind wasn't calm, it took me around 10 minutes to replenish the Tao energy in my body. It took me twice as much time as usual. However, it was strange that Yi Pianpian was still sitting there when I opened my eyes. According to my estimation, she only needed 10 minutes to replenish her Tao energy. Why did it take her so long? Was it because she wasn't as calm as she looked? While my imagination was running wild, Yi Pianpian suddenly opened her eyes. I was staring at her, so I blushed and moved my head away awkwardly. "How's your recovery?" Yi Pianpian stood up and nodded to me. "I've fully recovered. The people from Mount Longhu are adjusting their breathing. This time, we shouldn't split up. We'll attack together and deal with the 6 Taoists first. Their Tao energy has recovered by 30% at most. We have to cripple some of them before Chen Yangting can react. Then, we'll join hands to deal with Chen Yangting. That's the only way to win." Yi Pianpian's voice returned to its usual coldness. She held the green bamboo flute in her hand and didn't wait for my answer. She lifted her feet and dashed toward the place where the 6 Taoists were meditating. I hurried to put away my other thoughts. Although we had the true dragon aura, and our recovery speed was much faster than those Taoists, they were still stronger than us. Chun Yangting had used a talisman to draw out 3 heavenly lightning bolts. Who knew what other tricks he had? We couldn't afford to be careless, as we were in the middle of a battlefield. The 6 Taoists maintained their vigilance while adjusting their Tao energy. As soon as Yi Pianpian and I approached them, they opened their eyes at the same time. Seeing us take the initiative to attack, the 6 old Taoists were delighted. They didn't know that the Taoist energy in our bodies had been completely restored. Although they must have sensed the true dragon's vein after I brought out all the dark green energy, they most likely wouldn't have noticed the true dragon's vein due to the might of the heavenly lightning and the fatty's array concealing them. Afterward, the jade bracelet was inside the fatty's array, and its aura didn't leak out at all. In the distance, Chen Yangting opened his eyes and looked in our direction. Similarly, he probably thought that we were going to fight to the death, so he didn't get up and rush over. Instead, he closed his eyes again. He had yet to fully recover from the exhaustion of summoning the heavenly lightning. Before we could come close, the 6 old Taoists stood up and took out their magic talismans and talismans. They attacked us shoulder to shoulder. However, their power was much weaker than before. Yi Pianpian and I were shaken. I directed my Tao energy and the dark green energy into the yin-yang yama brush. The huge yin-yang fish appeared again, and the dark green energy was wrapped in the center of the yin-yang fish, forming a dark whirlpool. Obviously, the power of the whirlpool wasn't ordinary. It directly charged at the 6 Taoists. Yi Pianpian didn't hesitate. She used the astral footwork and the green bamboo flute in her hand at the same time. The green light net and the yin-yang fish moved toward the 6 Taoists. Although the astral footwork had been launched later, it arrived first. It suddenly appeared in the middle of the 6 Taoists, scattering wildly. In the blink of an eye, the power of the 6 Taoist talismans and magic tools was shattered by Yi Pianpian's astral footwork. The light net and the yin-yang fish didn't give the Taoists any chance. They directly enveloped the 6 Taoist bodies. The light net created by the green bamboo flute was strangely thin. It wrapped around the yin-yang fish, making it impossible to see it clearly. However, the yin-yang fish displayed its endless power. After wrapping around the 6 Taoists, it spun them crazily like a whirlpool in the water. At first, it was on the periphery. Then, it slowly brought them to the dark area in the middle. Right at this moment, the 6 Taoists, who had kept their composure despite their panic, suddenly screamed as if they had encountered something terrifying. Before I could see clearly, a shadow flashed in front of me. Chen Yangting finally noticed what had happened. He dashed toward us. He didn't hurry to attack Yi Pianpian and me. Instead, he threw a red talisman toward the yin-yang fish. As soon as it entered the yin-yang fish, the talisman emitted a pale white aura. After a few seconds, the yin and yang energy in the yin-yang fish suddenly became chaotic. The yin and yang energy reversed and directly collapsed. They became 2 wisps of yin energy and yang energy that quickly returned to the yin-yang yama brush. Chen Yangting's tense face relaxed a little, but soon he frowned again. The yin and yang energy had returned, but the dark whirlpool created by the dark green energy was still there. However, it was slowly dispersing. At this moment, I finally saw what had happened to the 6 Taoists. The dark whirlpool wasn't big, around the size of a wash basin. It hovered in the middle of the 6 Taoists. At this moment, 2 of their bodies hadn't touched the whirlpool. They were lucky. As for the other 4, 2 of their arms were completely buried in the whirlpool. One's head was hidden in the whirlpool, and the last one had half of his body in it. At first, I felt strange. How could a wash basin-sized whirlpool suck in half of their bodies? When the whirlpool finally disappeared, I opened my eyes wide in shock. When the whirlpool was still there, I couldn't see the parts of the 4 old Taoist bodies. But when the whirlpool disappeared, I still couldn't see the parts of their bodies. In other words, the whirlpool had melted 2 of their arms, 1 of their heads, and half of their bodies. At this moment, the old Taoist, whose head and half of his body had disappeared, was no longer breathing. The 2 old Taoists who had lost their arms gasped and hurried to use their Taoist energy to heal their bodies. Chen Yangting, who stood next to me with a dark face, coldly said, "I thought you were a genius from the celestial sect. I didn't expect you to use such an evil method. How is this different from the demonic path?" Although this tragic scene frightened me, I still snorted disdainfully at Chen Yangting's words. How could this be considered malicious? So, what if he wanted to kill me for no reason? I looked at him and coldly said, I don't dare. When it comes to evil methods, your Longhu Mountain is the best. I was just defending myself, but your Longhu Mountain wanted to kill me and steal my treasures. If this method of mine is considered to have fallen into the demonic path, then your Longhu Mountain is the overlord of the demonic path. You. Chen Yangting opened his mouth as if he was about to shout angrily. However, he kept silent in the end. Around half a minute later, he walked to the two old Taoists who weren't injured and asked them to clean up the bodies. Then he turned to us and said, Today, I'll let you go, but I'll report this to the Heavenly Master. If you kill the people of Longhu Mountain, you won't be able to escape to the ends of the earth. His words were just for show, but my heart still sank. Last time, I had offended the Liu family, and I had already paid a heavy price. This time, I had offended the Longhu Mountain, which was even more powerful. What would happen? At this time, Yi Piampian, who was standing next to me, coldly snorted. There's no need to go to the ends of the earth. 2 months from now, I'll personally go to Longhu Mountain. If Heavenly Master Zhang doesn't give me an explanation, I'll kill you. Yi Piampian's face was cold, and her expression didn't change. It was as if she was talking about something that couldn't be more normal. Chen Yangting's face darkened, but he didn't say anything. He called the old Taoists and returned to the car. Then he started the car and hurriedly left. After they left, we didn't dare to linger. The fatty retrieved the formation, and we hurried on our way. Since the driver had already left, we could only walk until midnight. When we reached the city, we took a taxi to the train station and went straight to Kaifeng. Then we followed the fatty to his Zhanshi sect. As soon as we arrived, the fatty took me and Yi Piampian, saying that he wanted to report to his master. Chapter 236. Why is he here? I stood there in a daze for a long time. It wasn't until Nangong smilingly walked over to greet me that I reacted. I asked him hoarsely, Why are you here? Without waiting for Nangong to reply, the fatty on the side spoke first and asked me, Third child, do you know Martial Uncle Nangong? Martial Uncle Nangong? The fatty's words greatly exceeded my expectations. Looking at Nangong, who was around the same age as me, I really couldn't associate him with the word martial uncle. After a moment of silence, I turned my head and asked the fatty if Nangong was from his sect. After receiving an affirmative answer, I couldn't help but furrow my brows. Previously, I had met Nangong twice. Although I felt that he was a strange person, I still treated it as a coincidence. But now, it seemed that wasn't the case. Since he was the fatty's senior, it was obvious that he had obtained information about me from the fatty. Furthermore, judging from the fact that he purposely went to meet me, he was definitely interested in something about me. To obtain information from the fatty, and to be interested in someone like him who was a metaphysician, it was most likely the trip to the underground palace back then. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but feel gloomy. That trip to the underground palace was related to the Red Shadow. For some reason, I felt that involving a person of the metaphysics world like Nangong wouldn't be beneficial to the Red Shadow, just like the ghost nurturing Sex Grand Elder Liang Tianxin. Moreover, this person was always smiling. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. Wasn't he too shrewd? Thinking of this, my expression couldn't help but turn cold. However, Nangong still had a smile on his face. He didn't feel offended in the slightest. He enthusiastically asked me about my situation after we parted last time. He also asked about my cultivation progress. After asking for a long time, he finally sighed and said that we were fated to meet here. Although he said that, from his expression, I could tell that he wasn't surprised at all. It was as if he had deliberately predicted that I would appear and was purposely waiting for me at the door. I pretended to smile and didn't say anything. I waited until the fatty's master, Master Guan, received my report and walked out of the room. Nangong finally stopped talking and stood to the side with a smile. It had been a full year since the fatty had disappeared. Now that he had suddenly reappeared, spiritual Master Guan, who was dressed in a Taoist robe, was naturally overjoyed. His solemn face revealed a smile. He led us to the inner room and sat down. Then he anxiously asked the fatty, "Last year, when you left the mountain, I had a divination. The divination at that time showed that the upper Yao line was 4, the wind was strong, and the waves were strong. The main character was the shock of the waves. The lower Yao line was 3, the Yin Mao, the U, 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 the U. I originally had the intention of letting you go out to temper yourself, but who knew that you would be gone for a whole year? Just what kind of unforeseen event happened? Where is Zhao Yongqun right now?" The fatty opened his mouth, but didn't know how to mention the trip to the fire god temple. After a long time, he opened his mouth and said, "Zhao Yongqun died a long time ago. Although my experience this year was strange, Master's divination was correct. I was frightened, but not in danger. I just stayed there for a year and came back smoothly. As for the details, I'll find some time to tell Master in detail." Master Guan understood the meaning behind his words. He nodded and didn't ask anything else. Instead, he chatted with Yi Pianpian and asked about Grandfather Li's recent situation. Then he turned to the fatty and asked about me. After listening to the fatty's brief introduction, Master Guan looked a little surprised. He said to me, "In the past 6 months, I've heard of Nephew Zhou's deeds. I didn't expect that Nephew Zhou would be a childhood friend of mine. Since you've come to Mount Yellow Crown this time, I hope you'll stay for a few days." Although his words were polite, his tone was still that of a kind elder. It warmed my heart a little. I smiled and chatted with him for a while. Master Guan seemed to have something to do, so he didn't talk to me anymore. He asked someone to help me clean up the guest room. Then he urged the fatty to take me to Yellow Crown Mountain for a walk. When I came out of the inner room, Nangong smiled and pulled me over. "Tonight, I'll go to the Heavenly Pavilion to meet him. He has something to tell me." After hearing his words, I was shocked. Ever since I met him, this guy had always been joking and joking. This time, he finally wanted to tell me something serious. But what did he want to talk about? Was it about the underground palace or the red shadow? I wanted to ask more questions, but after Nangong finished talking, he stood up and walked toward Master Guan. Yi Pianpian and I followed the fatty. Along the way, the fatty told me the inside story of the divination sect. Among the Taoist sects, the Talisman and Jindan sects were the most prosperous. However, apart from these two sects, the divination sect was the most famous. Since ancient times, the divination sect had been around for a long time and was very famous. It wasn't inferior to the Talisman and Jindan sections. However, the divination sect focused on divination and divination. They focused on cultivating in seclusion and didn't want to be associated with the mortal world. As a result, their fame gradually faded, and the outside world no longer knew about them. Thus, in recent times, the divination sect didn't have much of a reputation. However, the famous people of the divination sect in history were incredible. The first were Li Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang. The two of them had derived the pushback diagram from the ancient book and predicted the fate of the nation for 2,000 years. Apart from them, There were also the sleeping immortal Chuntuan, the Chao Wei magician of the Three Kingdoms period, and the famous necromancer Guipu of the Eastern Jin dynasty. The fat man's teacher, Taoist Master Guan, was said to be the descendant of Guan Li. His family's teachings were profound. The Taoist temple of the divination sect was called Tianyi Monastery. It was located on Mount Huangguanzi in the outskirts of Kaifeng City. The name Mount Huangguanzi also had an origin. It was said that Li Chuanfeng's father was also the Grand Master of the divination sect. People called him Huangguanzi. Mount Huangguanzi had been named after Li Chuanfeng's father more than 1,000 years ago. The fat man's eyebrows danced as we walked, but I didn't have much interest in him. My mind was occupied with Nangong's matter. According to my calculations, Nangong had learned about me from the fat man. I didn't feel good about it. I wanted to ask the fat man for confirmation. However, Nangong was the fat man's martial uncle from the same sect. Their relationship wasn't bad. If I asked him about it, the fat man would be stuck in a dilemma. I couldn't hide things in my heart. After walking for a while, the fat man saw something wrong. He stopped and asked me, "Are you in trouble? Why don't you look good?" As soon as he asked, I couldn't hold it anymore. I told him all my questions. Moreover, martial uncle Nangong suddenly came to Mount Huangguanzi 2 years ago. I don't know what he told my master. Later on, my master told the entire Tianyi monastery that Nangong was the Grand Master's disciple and that he used to travel around. From then on, I got a convenient martial uncle. Moreover, he didn't stay in Tianyi monastery for more than a few days. Not long after he came back, he left again. Then I went down the mountain. This is the second time I've seen him. The fatty's words were out of my expectations. It seemed like my earlier guess was completely wrong. The fatty wasn't familiar with this Nangong. That was really strange. Nangong kept trying to get close to me. What was his motive? I thought I had figured out his purpose, but now it was a mess. The fat man and I discussed for a long time, but we couldn't figure anything out. However, Nangong had asked to meet me at night. Maybe he would reveal something. At night, after the fat man arranged a guest room for me, I asked for the location of the Tiangang Pavilion and went there alone. Mount Huangguanzi wasn't small. After leaving the guest room, I walked for more than half an hour before I found the Tiangang Pavilion on the remote mountain road behind the Tianyi Monastery. It was a full moon, and the weather was clear. The moonlight illuminated the ground. From afar, I saw 2 figures sitting in the pavilion. I was puzzled. Nangong had asked to meet me in private. Why did he bring another person? When I got to the pavilion and saw the person, I was even more puzzled. The person waiting for me with Nangong was Yi Piampian. When I told the fat man about this during the day, Yi Piampian was right next to me. She didn't say anything at that time. Why did she suddenly appear here? Just as I was about to ask, I realized something was wrong. This person wasn't Yi Piampian. Yi Piampian had said that she never wore white clothes. This person was wearing a long white dress. It should be Yi Piampian. If this power was outstanding enough, no matter how rare it was, it shouldn't be that there weren't any rumors about it, right? After pondering for a moment, I asked Nangong, if I were to do as you said and let this power reach glory of knowledge, will there be any danger? After I asked that question, Yi Maolan, who had been sitting at the side, absent-mindedly, suddenly lifted her head to look at me. Nangong's expression also changed slightly. After a few seconds, he suddenly smiled and sighed. "You're really smart. I was just about to tell you about this. There will be danger, but those below the Celestial Master won't notice anything. You just have to be careful not to reveal this power in front of the celestial master. I thought for a moment before asking him, what if I accidentally reveal this power in front of the celestial master? The smile on Nangong's face gradually disappeared. Then you'll have to pray that I'm by your side at that time. I didn't understand what he meant. I frowned and asked, what if you're not there? If I'm not there, you'll definitely die. My heart instantly shuddered. What he meant was that if the celestial master were to notice this dark green power, he would definitely kill me. I had come into contact with many people with the power of the celestial master, but the one that gave me the deepest impression was the Liu family's Liu Zining, whom I had a family feud with. The scene where I couldn't even control my own body when I faced him was still fresh in my memory. Every time I thought about it, I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked at Nangong and shook my head. I'm timid. I don't want to take such a risk. Nangong didn't seem to be surprised by my words at all. He regained his smile. Whether you want to take the risk or not, that's obviously up to you. I'll only tell you one thing. When that power reaches glory of knowledge, it can move the stars and guide star power into the body. You should understand the difference between guiding star power and using the obsidian to reach glory of knowledge. Move the stars. Guide star power into the body. The essence of the glory of knowledge realm is to guide star power into the body, but in reality, it's just using the obsidian to absorb star power. To actually move the stars and guide star power is just a legend. In reality, I wasn't clear about the difference that Nangong was talking about, but as long as I thought about it, I would know how big the difference was. I remained silent. Before I could make a decision, Nangong stood up from the stone bench and waved at me. Then, he called Yi Maolan and left with him. After they left, my head was still dizzy. I sat in the pavilion for another half an hour before returning to the guest room. After returning, I was about to take off my clothes to sleep when I touched the wooden box on my body. Only then did I remember the small gift that Nangong had given me in the pavilion. I smiled wryly. Chapter 238. As I pressed the lid of the box, I was a little worried. In a situation where I wasn't sure if he was a friend or foe, there was still the possibility of Nangong harming me in secret. There might be something harmful in this small wooden box, and I might fall for it the moment I opened it. However, after thinking about it, I understood. When Nangong mentioned Heavenly Master, he seemed to be saying that he could protect me even if I faced Heavenly Master. This kind of power was obviously not something I could deal with now. If he really wanted to harm me, he could just attack me directly. There was no need to go through so much trouble. Thus, I didn't have any more worries and reached out to open the lid. The moment the lid opened, a black light shot out from the box. After circling a few times in the air, it stopped in front of me. Then, I heard an arrogant voice yelling at me. What is this place? Why is Grandpa's snake deity here? Why is it you, kid? Long time no see. Did you save Grandpa's snake deity? After it had talked for a long time, I stood there with my eyes wide open. I didn't know how to react. I never expected that Nangong would find the snake spirit and give it to me. Back then, the red handkerchief that the fatty's father had given me had the words, Ink Dragon Shilin, not on it. I had been guessing that the ink dragon here was referring to the snake spirit. I had always wanted to go to Miaojiang to find it, but the Miaojiang old which that took the snake spirit was at least in glory of consciousness. Before reaching glory of consciousness, it would be useless even if I went. That was why it had dragged on until now. I never expected that before I could do anything, Nangong would actually help me settle this matter without saying a word. It was just that this matter made me even more confused. Even though it was strange that he had given me pointers on the ghost seal and advised me to raise the dark green energy to the glory of consciousness realm, There were still traces of it, but why would he help me find the snake spirit? I couldn't understand after thinking for a long time, and my suspicions increased. I temporarily put aside these questions and looked at the snake spirit in midair. Its current appearance was different from before. Its originally enormous body had shrunk to the size of a palm. Even its silhouette couldn't be seen clearly. I could only see a ball of black fog. Although this fellow was despicable, we had known each other for a while. I was concerned about him. How have you been after we parted for a year? How did his body become like this? The moment I asked, the spirit snake started crying. She whimpered and said, "Grandpa's snake, Immortal, has suffered a lot. You don't know, but after that old woman brought me back, she said that I was some kind of dragon parasite. She even said that she wanted to help me transform. Every day, she would give me a bunch of spirits for me to eat. Poor me." Huaxia was used to calling itself the descendants of the dragon. There must be a reason for this. It was very likely that the dragon was a creature that surpassed humans or even created humans. However, my solemn expression didn't last long. After the spirit snake sighed, it immediately changed into a guilty tone. It said, "However, the true dragon's blood that the old witch mentioned isn't real dragon's blood. Then what is it?" "This. It has something to do with the true dragon vein that you feng shui masters talk about. Your realm is too low, so you probably don't understand. The true dragon vein has true dragon saliva. You haven't heard of it before, right? To put it simply, the true dragon's blood is to make a person swallow the true dragon saliva. Then you take out the blood from his body. The power of the true dragon saliva will fuse with the human's blood. The old witch said that after we find the true dragon saliva and get the true dragon's blood, I will be able to transform into a real dragon after I nourish myself in the true dragon's blood for a while." After the spirit snake finished its explanation, I sat there with my mouth wide open. According to the spirit snake, I had swallowed the true dragon saliva before. So, my blood was true dragon's blood. If the spirit snake nourished myself for a while, it would be able to transform into a dragon. The ink dragon mentioned in the Black Dragon Qilin not should be referring to the spirit snake's transformation into a dragon, right? Was this really just a coincidence? The spirit snake asked me curiously after seeing that I didn't speak for a long time. I smiled wryly and used a tone that I didn't believe myself. If I told you that I swallowed the true dragon saliva before, would you believe me? The spirit snake let out an sound like it was burping. Then it floated in midair and didn't move for a long time. A few minutes later, it pounced on my face like it had gone mad. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws at me. "Is what you said true? Don't lie to me. You really swallowed the true dragon saliva? The blood in your body is really true dragon's blood." Its voice was even trembling at the end. I smiled wryly and said, "As long as your definition of true dragon's blood is correct, then the blood in my body should really be true dragon's blood." Ha ha ha. The spirit snake suddenly burst into laughter. It looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh. "The heavens do not disappoint those who work hard. Ha ha. I never thought that Grandpa Spirit Snake, no, Grandpa Dragon God, would have a day like this. Ha ha ha. Kid, hurry up and let out your blood. Give it to Grandpa Dragon God to transform." This fellow still had that deranged look. When he got excited, he wouldn't stop talking. I stared at it and sneered coldly. "What are you? Say it again." The spirit snake then realized that something was wrong. It jumped down from midair and blushed as it moved next to me. It giggled and said that, "Spirit snake, no, little snake, I've always behaved well. Can you get my blood out?" "No, you don't have to get it out. You just have to raise me on your body. When I successfully transform into a dragon, I'll be by your side. Then I'll be able to help you, no matter what happens, right? I snorted and asked him how he could raise me on his body. The spirit snake immediately said, "That's simple. You just have to sit here and don't move. Don't even think about resisting. Just leave the rest to me." Because of Red Shadow's poem, I naturally didn't have any reason to reject him. I didn't talk nonsense with him, so I nodded and gestured for him to start. The spirit snake looked up to the sky and laughed. He rubbed his palms together and charged at me. After circling around me a few times, he suddenly pounced on my back. Then I felt a burning pain on my back. I followed what the spirit snake had said and didn't resist at all. After a few minutes, the burning pain slowly disappeared. The spirit snake's excited voice came from behind me. "It's done. It's real. It's real dragon blood." Ha ha ha. I tore off my top and walked to the full-length mirror in the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. There was still the silver Qilin tattoo on my chest, but it hadn't grown 4 limbs yet. I could faintly see the horn of a black flood dragon on my shoulder. When I turned my back, an exaggerated flood dragon tattoo covered my entire back. The dragon's body and tail extended from my ribs to my chest. It was close to the edge of the Qilin tattoo on my chest. It looked exaggerated and terrifying. This should be the so-called Black Dragon Qilin. Not. After such a long time, I finally saw the hope of reuniting with Red Shadow. I was excited at first, but gradually I calmed down. Red Shadow had asked the fatty's father to send me a message. I had swallowed the real dragon saliva to repair my meridians. Nangong had sent the spirit snake back to me. Even the old, which had helped the spirit snake shed its shell for the raising dragon goo. All of these things didn't seem to be related at all. But why did all of them happen to me at the same time? Chapter 240. I thought that Yi Pianpian would restrain herself after seeing Spiritual Master Guan, but to my surprise, she directly walked in front of Spiritual Master Guan and stiffly asked, "Where's Nangong?" Although Spiritual Master Guan and Yi Pianpian were old acquaintances, she was startled by her attitude. She frowned and asked, "Why are you looking for junior brother Nangong?" Yi Pianpian seemed to finally realize that she had lost her composure. After a moment of silence, she answered, "It's a private matter that I can't tell you in detail. I hope Marshal Aunt Guan can help me." It was obvious that Spiritual Master Guan and Yi Pianpian had a good relationship. She wasn't angry at this moment, and her expression became amiable. She pointed at the Wen King's hall behind her and said, "Junior brother Nangong is still in the hall. The innate divination ceremony hasn't ended yet, so he won't come out until 3 days later." Yi Pianpian raised her head and looked at the Wen King's hall with an eager expression. However, she was still calm and just nodded, saying that she would wait outside for Nangong to come out. Spiritual Master Guan didn't seem to care and said with a smile, "It's fine as long as it doesn't affect junior brother Nangong's ceremony to obtain the magic tool." Yi Pianpian nodded again and walked to the entrance of the hall. She crossed her arms and stood there, looking as if she was going to guard Nangong to the death. Spiritual Master Guan smiled and didn't say anything else before leaving with the other Taoists. Of course, the fatty didn't follow them. He quietly slipped out of the crowd and came to my side. With a puzzled expression, he asked me, "What's wrong with Yi Pianpian?" I wasn't sure if Yi Pianpian's secret was Yi Pianpian's, so it wasn't appropriate for me to tell the fatty. I forced a smile and spread my hands, changing the topic. "Your master said that it'll take around 3 days. Let's go talk to her." The fatty and I went to Yi Pianpian's side. Before we could talk to her, She said, "I'll stay here to watch over Nangong. You two search around the Yellow Crown Mountain and see if you can find her." Not only did I fail to talk to her, but I also added a difficult task to do. The fat man was hesitant. He wanted to ask something, but I hurried to pull him away. After we left King Wen's hall, the fat man shook my hand off and asked me with a puzzled face, "You two are acting so mysteriously. What are you doing?" I didn't want to talk about Yi Mowling before, but since Yi Pian had mentioned her in front of the fatty, I didn't want to hide anything. I simply told him about Yi Mowling. After hearing this, the fatty's eyes widened in disbelief. He said doubtfully, "How is this possible? I've known Yi Pian for 6 or 7 years, but I've never heard of her having a twin sister." I shook my head with a bitter smile. "Don't ask me. I've only seen Yi Pian twice. I don't know what their relationship is, but this is obviously very important to Yi Pian. We should try our best to help her." Then the fat man took me to the Tai temple. We didn't find anything, so we left the temple. We walked along Mount Huang, Guanshan from east to west. We carefully looked around, but we still didn't find anything. When we returned to King Wen's hall, it was almost dawn. Yi Pian was still standing outside the hall with her arms crossed. Not only did she not leave, but she didn't even change her position. The fat man tried to persuade her for a long time, but Yi Pian didn't budge. In the end, we had no choice but to stay here and wait with Yi Pian. Since we had Taoist energy, not eating or sleeping for 3 days wouldn't affect us much. 3 days passed quickly, but there was still no movement in King Wen's hall. Yi Pian's frown deepened. She didn't stand still outside the hall anymore. Instead, she paced around the hall's gate. Sometimes she lifted her head to look at the gate as if she wanted to break in. I felt something was wrong, so I whispered to the fat man, "Did your master lie to Yi Pian?" The fat man felt a little guilty, but he still told me that Nangong was there when they left King Wen's hall. He saw it with his own eyes, so he couldn't be wrong. Another day passed amidst our suffering. On the morning of the 4th day, the continuous ringing of a bell finally came from Prince Wen's hall. The 3 of us were startled and turned to look at the hall's door, waiting in silence. Around half an hour later, the ringing of the bell finally disappeared. Then we heard a squeaking sound from the gate. King Wen's hall, which had been closed for several days, finally opened. A figure wearing a plain Taoist robe walked out. It was Nangong. He was in good spirits with a strange smile on his face. He didn't look surprised when he saw the 3 of us waiting outside. He walked to the gate and looked at us with a smile. Yi Pian was the most impatient. She walked to Nangong and asked him coldly, "Where's Yi Pian?" Nangong's smile didn't change. He answered casually, "She should still be on Mount Huangguan. Why are you looking for her?" Before Yi Pian could answer, the fat man and I said in unison, "That's impossible. We've searched Mount Huangguan several times in the past few days, but we didn't find any trace of Yi Pian." Nangong curled his lips. "You two are much weaker than Yi Pian. Isn't it normal that you can't find her?" The fat man and I didn't know what to say. Yi Pian didn't mind. Her eyes didn't leave Nangong as she said, "Take me to see her." Nangong nodded straightforwardly and led the way out of the monastery. Yi Pian followed him without hesitation. The fat man and I exchanged glances and hurried to catch up with him. On the way out of the hall, I kept my eyes on Nangong. He had stayed in King Wen's hall for 4 days to retrieve the inherited instrument of the divination sect. However, I didn't find any trace of the instrument after staring at him for a long time. I didn't know if he had succeeded or not. After exiting the back gate of Extreme Celestial Monastery, we continued forward. It did not take long before we arrived outside the Heavenly Astral Pavilion where I had met Nangong the other day. Nangong stopped and pointed forward. There, Yimarolan is there. I looked up and widened my eyes. Yi Pianpian was sitting on a stone bench in the Heavenly Pavilion, dressed in white. She was sitting in the same position as when I had seen her that night. She hadn't changed at all. It was as if she had been sitting there since that day. When enemies came face to face, their eyes turned especially red. It was still uncertain whether Yi Pianpian and Yi Maolan were enemies, but there was no doubt that their eyes were red. The moment Yi Pianpian saw Yi Maolan, she walked straight into the pavilion. The fat man and I were about to follow her, but Nangong stopped us and said with a smile, "This is between the two of them. Let's not go over there." As soon as he said that, Yi Pianpian stopped and turned around to say, "Don't follow me." Then she hurried into the pavilion and sat down on the stone bench opposite Yi Pianpian. Due to the distance between us and the fact that the two of them were much stronger than me and the fat man, we couldn't hear their conversation. The fat man was quick-witted and took advantage of this opportunity to ask Nangong with a smile, "Martial Uncle Nangong, who is this Yi Pianpian?" Nangong chuckled and completely ignored him. He pulled me to the side and asked me, "Have you thought about it for the past few days? I forgot to tell you that after you absorb the energy into the vein of the heavens, you only need to have Jinren Guan set up a spirit locking formation for you and place it on your jade bracelet. That way, the aura of the true dragon vein won't leak. Moreover, I've already told Jinren Guan about this. After he's done with it, he'll have Lin who send it over to you. You don't have to worry about this." I didn't have any secrets when facing Nangong, so I didn't find it strange at all. However, his enthusiasm made me even more vigilant. It's said that those who are unaccountably solicitous are hiding evil intentions. He was helping me with all his might for no reason. What was he planning? After hesitating for a while, I shook my head. I'm timid and don't dare to take such a big risk. Wait until I have the ability to deal with the Celestial Master's pursuit before I consider raising this energy to the glorious knowledge realm. This matter seemed to be his weakness. After hearing my words, the smile on his face faded. He said with slight anxiety, "You have to think this through. If you reach the Celestial Master realm with both types of energy, the Lu family definitely won't be your match. However, if you only rely on Dao Qi to reach the Celestial Master realm, let alone Lu Ziang, even if you want to kill Lu Zining, who killed your parents, you'll have to spend at least a dozen years. Can you wait that long?" I have to say, Nangong found a very good reason. The Lu family's vengeance was my weakness. For the sake of revenge, I didn't want to wait a second longer, let alone a dozen years. Seeing that I was somewhat moved, Nangong struck while the iron was hot, and continued, "I was at the scene on the day your parents were murdered. Lu Xining's cultivation was at most at the early stages of the Celestial Master realm. If you follow what I said, and cultivate both types of energy, when you become a Celestial Master, you can easily kill him. Even if you face Lu Ziang, you'll have the power to fight." His words stunned me. It wasn't because I was shocked at the power of cultivating both types of energy, nor was it because I was curious about the Celestial Master realm. It was because Nangong said that he was at the scene on the day my parents were murdered. Although I was used to him knowing all of my secrets, this matter was completely different. My mind went blank. I extended my hand and grabbed Nangong's collar. I shouted at him, "Since you were at the scene, why didn't you help me? Why didn't you save my parents?" Chapter 241. With my current 9 acupoints sealed, Nangong could deal with me with one hand. However, Nangong didn't say a word even after I shouted at him. He only retracted the smile on his face and looked at me quietly after shouting at him. I also felt that I had lost my composure. I abruptly let go of him and stood there in silence. Nangong finally spoke. If you had been in danger, I would have definitely helped you. However, your parents, I have orders, so I have no right to interfere. As for the matter I just mentioned, you have to make your own decision. Then Nangong turned and walked down the mountain along the small path. His figure quickly disappeared in the morning mist. After he left, the fatty hurried to my side and anxiously asked me, "What happened?" Although I knew that I was being unreasonable, I was still somewhat irritated. I shook my head and didn't speak. The fatty saw that my expression wasn't right and didn't speak either. He pointed at the Tiangang pavilion and told me, "Yi Pianpian is back." After this incident, I had forgotten about Yi Pianpian's matter. I quickly turned to look in that direction. The scene of the two of them fighting as soon as they saw each other didn't happen. Yi Pianpian was still sitting on the stone bench in the pavilion, while Yi Pianpian stood up and walked towards us. Not knowing what had happened, the fatty and I quickly went to greet her. Yi Pianpian's expression seemed to be much better than before. She had regained her usual calm and indifference. Without waiting for us to speak, she directly said to us, "Let's go back." Then she walked in the direction of the Tai monastery. At this time, I turned to look at the Tiangang pavilion and was surprised to find that Yi Pianpian's figure had disappeared. This scene shocked me. According to my deductions, Yi Morolin's strength was about the same as Yi Pianpian's. Although she was stronger than me, there was a limit to how much stronger she was. She shouldn't have been able to disappear without me noticing. I couldn't understand why, but Yi Pianpian and the fatty had already walked far away. I could only quickly follow them. When we returned to the back door of Tai Temple, a little Taoist boy was standing there. When he saw us, he hurried over and said to the fatty, "Senior Brother Lin, Master wants you to see him." After the fatty left in a hurry, Yi Pianpian also returned to her room without saying a word. I was the only one left. I had nowhere to go, so I returned to my room and sat cross-legged on my bed. Originally, I was preparing to adjust the Tao energy in my body, but after I sat down, I couldn't help but recall what Nangong had said to me. He said that he had his own orders and had no right to interfere with my parents' matters. Over the past few days, I had always felt that Nangong knew almost all of my secrets, and his every word and action seemed to be controlling me. However, after he said that, I suddenly felt that everything he did was against his will. Why was this happening? According to my calculations, he should have the strength of a celestial master. What kind of person could make a celestial master lose control? A few days ago, I had already felt that I was trapped in a big net. My every word and action seemed to be controlled by someone else. Now, this feeling was even clearer and stronger. Moreover, it seemed that I wasn't the only one trapped in that big net. The more I thought about it, the more chaotic my mind became. In the end, I could only shake my head and suppress these irritating thoughts. I focused on adjusting my Tao energy. No matter what, strength was the only thing I could rely on to protect myself. Yi Pianpian was right. After the battle with the Taoists from Mount Longhu, our realms had increased. I could even feel that I wasn't far from reaching the peak of the acupoint ceiling realm. If I worked hard these days, there would be hope for me to reach the peak of the acupoint ceiling realm. 1 hour passed in the blink of an eye. I guided the Tao energy in my body to complete a complete cycle. Just as I was about to continue cultivating, a warm current suddenly surged from my left wrist. It flowed along my arm and rushed toward my meridians. I was startled and quickly lowered my head to check. At this moment, the yin-yang symbol on the head of the Tao Ghost seal on my left wrist had become much fainter. Even the entire seal had become a faint scar. As the Tao Ghost seal became fainter, the warm current surged even more violently and crazily entered my meridians. I had experienced this process before. Moreover, I had received Nangong's reminder a few days ago. At this moment, I didn't panic. I focused on guiding the warm current to fuse with the Tao energy in my body and circulate it through my meridians. In the end, it gathered in my meridians and gathered in my meridians. Then, it rushed towards the last acupoint that hadn't been opened yet. This was different from using the Netherworld Ascension technique to open the acupoint. This time, I used the most primitive method, which was to stimulate the Tao energy in my body. When the Tao energy was concentrated to the limit of the acupoint's capacity, I forcefully opened the last acupoint. This method had a strong foundation, but the efficiency wasn't high. It required a lot of Tao energy. However, the Tao energy that was being converted from the Tao Ghost seal was much more vigorous than I had imagined. There wasn't any stagnation at all. The last acupoint was opened in a few seconds. The surging Tao energy rushed into the acupoint. That wasn't the end. After a few seconds, the Tao energy had completely filled up the 10th acupoint of the heaven meridian. Only when the Tao energy had filled up the 10th acupoint of the heaven meridian would it be considered to have completed the acupoint sealing.